Hi, this is Kurt Doolittle, the Natural Institute. We're continuing our ongoing interview with author Luke Weinhagen, good friend, ex-Marine, if I understand correctly, current troublemaker, and mischief maker, but a very smart man who we all should listen to. Last week we covered the chapter 1 of his book, and we tried to sort of get what he was getting across. And this week we're going to work on what I believe is chapter 2, which has the very entertaining title of "Why You Don't Need Toilet Paper," which is I don't know. I mean, that's just weird, but it's certainly a hook. So, Luke, what are you really trying to get across in this chapter?
Right. So one of the the book was written during the pandemic, right?
Yep.
And at the early onset of the pandemic, one of the panics we saw was the toilet paper panic.
Oh, I see.
Right. People were losing their minds because they couldn't hoard enough toilet paper. They had no idea how they were going to function without enough toilet paper. Right. So this is directly speaking to that feeling, that sensation of, oh my God, I'm going to run out of toilet paper, and how insane it is that the apex predator on the planet could even form that thought ever. Right. That's
ridiculous, really.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it demonstrates that we've truly abandoned our concept or conceptualization of taking responsibility for self.
Mm-hmm.
And we've externalized that responsibility onto all of these structures around us, like the grocery store where we buy our toilet paper. Right? That shouldn't be a trigger for anybody. It should be a convenience, a preference, but it shouldn't send us into a panic and into a tizzy. And there shouldn't be fights in stores over packages of toilet paper.
I mean, not everybody. I mean, I know what I did. When I heard the toilet paper thing, I went online. I had looked up what's the supply chain for toilet paper, and what's their ability to scale. It's fucking infinite,
Right?
Right. The only problem with toilet paper is voluminous, right? It takes up space.
Right.
It has low weight but high volume, and so it's like the primary problem with toilet paper is getting it somewhere. It's not making the stuff, right? And it's not like it takes a rare material. Right, it takes wood pulp and acid, right? I mean, no more than that, really. But so I'm like, okay, so I just did it in my head. So how many people are stupid enough to go on to hoard toilet paper? Well, unfortunately, way more than I thought. It was like an IQ test on the population, and every IQ test the population takes is fucking depressing. So anyway, my little old lady mother being a great example of, oh my God, we're going to be out of toilet paper. I don't know what I'm going to do. Obviously, never had to shit in the woods, on a camping.
Well, that's just
right,
it.
I mean,
we've been human far longer than we've had toilet paper.
Toilet paper, yes. So I sort of like, well, this is going to equal out in like at maximum 90 days, right?
Yeah,
and it did. Right? But how long did it? Wasn't 90? Was it 90 days? It was about.
The only reason I paid any attention to it at all was because of its absurdity, not because I had any stress about having access to toilet paper.
So that's where you got the idea from.
Yeah, that's in a lot of ways.
That's brilliant and humiliating.
Right. Yeah, exactly. and it should be brilliant and humiliating, right? But in a lot of ways, that's the audience that I'm speaking to with the entire book, right? Is the people that are in a position where if the grocery store runs out of something, they have no other way of accessing that something.
Oh, I see. So you're trying to you're using this as an example of external dependence.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm trying to do it as lightheartedly as I can, but at the same time, this is a significant vulnerability that a lot of people have put themselves into at the moment.
The only thing I worry about is ammo.
Right.
Sorry, I just had to throw that in there. It just felt right. It's not true either. But I just felt right. But I think you have a deeper. What is this? You tie this back to responsibility, right? So could you cover that? What are you really trying to get across to the audience here?
Right. So a lot of the points I make revolve around this idea that we're extending childhood ever further into adulthood, right? One of the errors that emerges from that, one of the failure points that emerges from that, is that we aren't developing our capacity to be responsible for ourselves in that occurrence, in that happening. Right. We're especially at the level of, we talked last time about the bottom two layers of Maslow's hierarchy, right? That those basic needs, those individual needs, specifically at those levels, we've really abandoned responsibility for provisioning those bottom two levels. Right. And a lot of what my argument is, a lot of what we're seeing, a lot of the social strife that we're seeing is because of that. Right. And so we've because we're not developing that responsibility for self, we can't offer it or provide it externally. We can't extend it beyond ourselves, which I argue is a required pressure to fully develop into a mature human being, right? Is that extension of responsibility beyond myself.
You said it more simply in the past. It's like, I think it's like the argument that we're too rich. You said, I think in the past you said it something along the lines of, look, the point I was trying to get past in the first chapter, and the point I'm trying to amplify here, because I understand the rest of this chapter, is that we are under the illusion, two illusions. One is that we're more independent and safe and secure than we think we are.
Right.
And secondly, that it's actually, if you know some basics, it's really easy to fix that problem.
Yes.
And in fixing that problem, which is a basic understanding, you get mindfulness that will stop you from panicking about these crazy things.
Yes.
Because you'll have a better grasp of them, because you'll be more functionally independent, and you will be because, frankly, you're more responsible.
Right.
But you're more responsible because you're more capable.
Yes.
Right, of being responsible. And so one of the things I've also heard you say is that, and I'm trying to get you to talk about this, obviously, is that is this connection between the illusion, the capacity, the responsibility, and once your responsibility, external threats become opportunities instead of risks.
Correct.
Right. Now that chain of reasoning, right, is how I think about things. Right. But I think actually your audience wants to, or the audience I want to understand you. Like, I have not equal, but I have an interest in people understanding your work because it's the foundation of what the rest of my work is.
Right. That's the point, right? We got to build that foundation, and that's what we're gonna go over here today as we discuss this chapter. That's specifically what I'm trying to accomplish with this chapter, right? So in the first chapter, I wanted to, it was important to help people understand that it's not, there's no blame in this. It's not their fault. They just weren't exposed to this material, right? This second chapter, what I'm trying to do with the second chapter is start to build for them. It's not your fault, but it is now your responsibility.
There we go.
Create the awareness of it. So now we're not going to hold you accountable for not knowing it, but moving forward, because you have access to it now, because we've identified the problem, because we're presenting a solution, now you are responsible for it.
Okay, so I'm afraid of God mode speech.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you say, oh, you are responsible. Well, that's different. You can be responsible.
Right. Yeah.
If you're not responsible, you're the victim. Whereas if you're responsible, you're the agent.
Right.
Right. And so when you say you are responsible, I think what you mean is you can be responsible.
Yes.
Is that right? Or am I getting that wrong?
Yeah. We're creating the conditions where responsibility is accessible to you.
Okay.
So in order to, right. So to do that, I create a context for the reader, right?
Okay.
So that they can understand where in this scheme of responsibility they are, where in this scheme.
Does that have to do with more kinds of things like toilet paper, or are you gonna?
Yeah, it's toilet paper's all over the place in this book. So, in fact, in a pinch, you can use it that way. So.
All right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause you to digress, but the opportunity.
No. So one of the things I start off in the chapter is trying to get across the point that because the things I'm talking about, what the core human competencies that I'm talking about, these are things that evolved as we became more and more human, right? As we shifted from, the animal to what we define as human nowadays, right? From just Homo to Homo sapien, that kind of thing. These skills that we're talking about evolved in that process. They're not difficult to acquire. They're not difficult to learn. They're not beyond anyone with at least a normal functioning brain. If you don't have brain damage, you can learn these skills, right?
Yes.
So while it was not your fault that you don't have them, you are capable of acquiring them. Right? There's no barrier to your acquisition of them.
It just seems like there's a field of great sarcasm available after that statement,
Right.
but it's actually true. Right. So you can. It's not. It's like that. It's like I would say it's not rocket science. It's
right, but
because we're fucking humans.
Right. Yeah. There's nothing stopping you from acquiring these competencies.
Okay.
Right. And that's what I mean when I say that you are responsible. It's not that somebody's holding you responsible or forcing responsibility upon you. It's that there's nothing stopping you from acquiring these skills that establish this foundation upon which everything else is built. Right. So once I put that position in place, kind of, that create that context, then I go into a little bit, I take a bit of a jab here on the self-help industry, the self-care industry. And that's
okay. They deserve it. It's all right.
Right. Right. A lot of, I look at a lot of that industry as Band-Aid makers. They're creating a solve, not a solution.
Well,
right?
I mean, I'm not as nice as you are. So I call it seduction into a false promise.
Yeah. There's a lot of that, and a lot of it's good intention, and people have great success in shifting some of the specific problems they're working on, but none of them, from what I've seen, anyways, none of them are addressing the underlying issues. None of them are addressing the foundation, the missing foundation. None of them are addressing that base level competence that needs to support everything else above that. So even if you strongly believe in all those other methods of self-care, the stuff that I'm offering here will amplify the effectiveness of any of those things that actually work, because you'll be applying them from a foundation.
Can you help me here? Because I don't really know this stuff. Right. I have an allergic reaction to an intellectually allergic reaction to that kind of stuff because I actually find it offensive. And it's partly because I was raised in the period of EST and that kind of shit.
Right.
And so we went through that stuff in the 80s, and it turned out it's all bullshit. Right. And so that went from the sort of corporate sponsored to this household, or I don't know what to call it, tradesman or craftsman. I don't know. It went becoming instead of a couple of very large, widespread bad ideas, it became a large number of very widespread, small bad ideas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Right. And so what I was afraid of when I first started here, because by the way, he didn't tell me about this fucking book, right? I found about it by somebody else way late in the process, because that's how kind of cunning this fucking guy is. Anyway, so when I heard about it, I was like, oh no, I hope he doesn't write it as a self-help book, because that's not what it is. That's like calling learning your ABCs a self-help book.
Right.
It's not, or it's not learning your. It's like learning basic life skills so that you aren't a victim. Anyway, so
which I would suggest is a more accurate description of self-help and self-care. So
yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm getting at. I view much of the self-care industry as excuse making.
Yes.
They're like you said, they're baiting into hazard. They're offering an avenue for you to evade responsibility.
Correct.
Right. Which doesn't solve it. It
solves. Do you think about it? We got to criminalize most of the industry if you say it that way. That's horrible.
It is horrible. It is horrible. But
bad therapy.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. It's addressing the symptoms without ever touching on the causes. That's
they don't know.
That's its selling point. Exactly. They don't know.
They know, but they don't know.
Right. And that's what I'm trying to change here. And so, some of those guys are people that I'm actively trying to reach out to, because if they are doing something that's helping people, let's magnify that. Let's amplify it but with building, an effective support system underneath it. Right. So to the degree that any of them,
you have to know that that the purpose of any therapy is getting you to the position where you can develop responsibility, not numbness. Or not, because that's the problem with self-help, right? It works for the first 24 hours and then it's gone. Right. Yeah. Whereas what you're saying is you can make this permanent if you can adopt the responsibility. Am I over pushing this?
No, but we'll get into it more as we go through this. But one of the other concepts that I talk about online quite a bit is this idea that blame and permission are child's frames. And a lot of the self-help industry is approaching all of these problems, is trying to solve all these problems with blame or permission, giving people permission to be their true selves, or they're trying to discover where the source of the problem is by applying blame, and they're maintaining that childishness.
Right, exactly.
They're maintaining that evasion of responsibility, that development of agency,
which gets you to your next point, mindfulness.
Right. So the next portion of the book, after taking a jab at the self-care industry, and by the way, I use the term primal self-care in here on purpose, because I'm offering a counter to contemporary self-care, which is a salve, not a solution, right? So I want to solve it at the root. I want to solve it at the base, right? And that foundation, building that foundation, restoring that foundation, correcting that foundation, makes mindfulness accessible, or it makes the development of mindfulness accessible.
Yes, absolutely. You're no longer temporarily compensating for an emotion. You're curing the problem, and the problem itself is what produces anxiety that mindfulness cures.
Which is why the subtitle of the book is "Slay Anxiety." Mm-hmm. That's one of the actual things that happens when you do this work, right? So, a lot of what people are calling mental illness these days is not mental illness. There's not a chemical imbalance in the brain. There's not something broken. It's a failure of developing the ability to regulate, whether you're regulating emotion or attention or any of these other things. That's what is manifesting as mental illness, what people are calling mental illness. And we're medicating it, and we're using excuse therapy to correct for it. Neither one of those things is solving the underlying problem, which is that foundation, right? It's the development of human competence, or the lack of development of human competence, that is the source of those dysfunctions emerging.
Well, can we again say it's not their fault? Can we bring that side in again?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because you've said this 1,000 times, because you're a nice man, and you're a good and moral and nice man. I wish I could be more like you. Anyway, sorry, but the problem for most people is we have spent most of human history up until after the post-war period, where we had so many structures around us that they didn't have to train us or indoctrinate us, because we lived with narrow choices inside of frames where people were self-regulating each other. But this era of prosperity and individualism, in other words, we're so wealthy now that we think for a moment, we can be independent of those norms, traditions, values, understandings, and adaptations, right?
Right.
We think we're independent. We think we're free of them. The problem is that's assuming that those behaviors were intrinsic to the human, instead of evolved behaviors, right? That we have developed over millennia, right? In order to make sure we're mindful. Right? We're not anxious, but we're mindful. And if we're anxious, it's about something that's real, right? And that we're capable of obtaining mindfulness through self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency through self-regulation.
Yes.
And so it's not, we don't go out, I mean, I go out and blame the Marxists and the feminists for telling people otherwise, right? That there's some chance that they might be mindful if they don't have these structures. But like you said, that's just evasion of responsibility, right?
Yes. Yeah. And what you've described perfectly is that all of those structures, all of those institutions were proxies for the pressure that the limits that nature would impose on us. Right. And so we've reached this point of of prosperity, where we've abandoned even those proxies, and we haven't applied or introduced any new proxies.
Oh, you see, this is why I keep saying I wanted to talk to you about this, because there's like an incredible depth behind what you've written here, and and I'm like, of course, I want to experience that incredible depth,
Right.
and I want the public to experience that depth. So one of the things I got from you is to think about it as in terms of nature, then tribe, then civilization, then complex niches within civilizations,
Right.
as providing all this frame around us that we take for granted, like fucking gravity.
Yes.
Right. And so what you're saying is, dude, I mean, we're not bound by nature. We're not bound by the tribe. We're not bound by the civilization. We think we're free of all of the things below, right?
Right.
And you wonder why people are going crazy, because there's actually no way to be unanxious at the right. There's no way to get around it,
right,
unless you realize we're still human.
Yes.
And nature still exists.
Yes.
Right. And all that other stuff, that's a luxury good we've produced, right? Yeah. But if you're not like a fully developed human, able to comprehend what all those things between us and nature, you might take those things for granted or become the victim of them. Is that a way to frame it?
That is what I argue we're seeing. That is exactly what I'm describing. When I describe the modern world, that's how I describe it. That's what I see there. So yeah.
If I just love that narrative. I mean, I don't love that it's true.
Right.
I just love that you've given us that narrative structure to look blamelessly. I mean, because what else would we do, right? We just freaking got the Industrial Revolution and everything happened. We're running around and we can do all sorts of stupid shit. We got the birth control pill. We got antibiotics, and we've got fiat money, and we've got radio, telecommunications, and internet, and we got cars, and so we're turning into these round people who, I mean, I'm in a race right now to be the short, fat, bald American president who has to waddle to the fucking grocery store if I'm not careful, right? So we have all these luxuries, right? And why wouldn't we think that we were free?
Right.
Well, why wouldn't we?
And why wouldn't we look at all those luxuries and think ourselves masters of the universe?
Yes.
But really, we've become slaves to all of those luxuries. We're not the master of anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's just drug addiction, right? I mean, at another scale. And so we're not making fun of, you're not making fun of the fact that these goods exist. No. You're saying that if you're going to feel mindfulness is a product of responsibility, of competency. Yes. Competency is a result of defining responsibilities within your limits of competency, right? Yes. And succeeding at them in a cooperative organization with lots of other people doing various different things. That's what mindfulness results from.
Right.
Right.
And with that, once you develop that, then all of these treasures are yours without the risk of self-destruction.
Well, can you do that as a series? Self-destruction, accidental misjudgment, becoming a victim of circumstance, and this being victimized by people who control the information that you get. I mean, is there some spectrum there?
Yeah, because I was applying the term broadly to the group, not to the individual. Yeah. Each of those represent different stages of how the group will become self-destructive, right? Or we're gonna start, selling off our intergenerational wealth. We're gonna start buying into the false promise of our enemies. We're gonna do all of those things because we aren't limited. There's no pressure to not do those things from the environment, from nature, from our institutions, from proxies for nature. We've abandoned all of those guardrails.
Yes.
Right.
And so I feel like I'm so excited about this subject that I'm talking too much. and when I actually want to hear you, but I mean, every time you say something, it's so freaking interesting. I feel like I got head color. So does the audience understand what mindfulness is? Do they think they do?
Um,
How would you encourage them to understand mindfulness? You're trying to get rid of anxiety.
right. Yeah. So I when I talk to people that don't have our foundation of work that we've explored these topics in the depth that we've explored them to, what I want people to experience, what I want people to develop, what I want people to possess is a state of relaxed readiness, where the challenges that emerge out of their environments aren't disruptive. They're just simply challenges. And you're capable of reading the signals and the cues from the environments and the people in the environments so that you can respond to the emergence of those challenges rather than have to react to those challenges.
You're using it as confidence in your competence.
Confidence and competence is a solution to dependence
which is actually what it is, right? I mean,
yeah. I'm looking for I'm using the applied form of it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, boy, now I'm not going to go down that rat hole, but that's a pretty profound statement, because now you go to Buddhism and Hinduism and you know, I can go across the whole freaking world and say, let's talk about how each of these cultures does it, not this way, right? All right. So, but so again, you know, there's a bit of stoicism in your, which is it's a more action oriented version of stoicism.
Yeah, I definitely throughout the material, I'm really trying to bias people towards action.
Yeah.
Right. And if it's not, if a cue, a signal, a pressure is not driving you towards action, then it's misplaced to have an emotional attachment to it.
Correct.
Right. I mean, things like anxiety and fear, these are very, very important emotions because they're designed to trigger action. And I you know, I make a distinction between fear and things like dread and panic. Dread and panic are projections of potential signals, fear signals, right? Whereas fear itself is a pure signal from an environment that something has happened that requires you to fight, flight, or freeze, right? I mean, it's
no, wait a minute. We're just running out of limes for my Corona falling that hierarchy.
That's more of a dread or a panic.
All right. So I think we got mindfulness across there,
right.
as
so that's all kind of the introductory section of the book, and then I get into it is in there as well. I do introduce, you know, kind of a layman's term to natural law and things like that. I try to create the entire context for the conversation that I'm having with the reader through the rest of the book in this chapter. Right. Okay, so I really try to create as much of a context as possible for them to stand in.
So what you're doing is you're saying, well, we use the term natural law for a bunch of strategic reasons, right, but it's just the science of cooperation.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And that's the whole point of everything else that we're going to discuss here, is to turn you back into a human being so that you can cooperate with other human beings. That's the end goal of the whole book. Mm-hmm. That sums up the book in one sentence. Make you a human being that can cooperate. That's capable of cooperation. So after mindfulness, I actually started getting into sections of the book. The first one is a section on maturity and how I'm using it, how I'm applying it in the book. Right.
So you're defining your use of maturity as a sequence.
As a sequence, yes. And it's the biological and technical development transitions that the individual goes through, or at least that they should go through, as they move from complete dependence as that infant through complete self-sufficiency as the adult. And that's one of the metrics of adulthood, I believe.
Can you help me get beyond the adolescent stage? Because I'm having a challenge with that.
I think most of us are somewhere in that adolescent, young adult age in our society. So very few of us are actually reaching adulthood anymore. So. But I'm
not worried about the adolescents. I'm worried about the children.
Right. Yeah. And I'm worried about the adults consuming what we ought to be making available for the children.
Yes, thank you.
So, and there's I use 6 stages in the book here. I do that on purpose because I use 6 for the next one as well. So I use infant, toddler, child, adolescent, young adult, and adult. Right.
Where's stubborn old bastard?
Stubborn old bastard. So once we get to adult, then you can start reverting a little bit because you've already demonstrated responsibility, you've extended responsibility beyond oneself. Then you have the luxury to start reverting a little bit. You can get a little bit more childish because you're consuming your own cost at that point. You're not imposing a cost on others, right? So after maturity, I get into development as a parallel to maturity. And this is kind of the interpersonal and social developmental transitions that we've seen.
Wait, say that again.
The interpersonal or social developments, the group,
okay, yes.
group element, how maturity emerges in a group, right? Or another way to think of this is what's my agency or access to responsibility, right? So we have.
Okay. Well, I take that one. Yeah, I like that a lot. Just your what agency am I capable of, and therefore what responsibility can I obtain, and what mindfulness results.
Right.
Because there's a sort of, think of it as distance in time and space.
Yep.
Like when you're small and ignorant, you have a very, right? When you're adult, hopefully your worldview is, something other than, between the beer in the fridge and the television, right? I mean,
right.
Hopefully. All right. And so what you're saying is that it's okay. I got that. Okay. Because I didn't understand development when I first looked at it.
Yeah. And one of the things I'm really trying to do with these two parts here is draw the parallel between the level of dependency and the level of self-determination at each of these stages. And that's why there's 6 stages in each one of them. That's why I've got maturity and development, right? So in development, the 6 stages are the indentured ward or slave, right? Then there's the serf, then there's the indentured servant, the freeman, the citizen, and the sovereign. Right.
I've diagrammed this before, but I don't think it ever hit me so hard. I've made this table before.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't think I ever internalized it because I've always thinking about how do I get somebody to be a citizen. I'm not really thinking about starting at the bottom like you do with the first principles and working up to the individual maturity. Very good.
Yeah, but and it, in a lot of ways, it's because of just the way we discuss history and the way we explore history. A lot of it's been those transitions have been hidden from us in the same way that we don't recognize or we don't consciously stay aware of the transitions from infancy to adulthood.
Well, isn't that something we ought to try to reinstitute?
I'm suggesting
I won't take you there. My whole thing is, I kind of, at least for me, Catholic confirmation was useful.
Yes.
I'd prefer it like had sword fighting or something in it, but but the fact that this stuff and can recite it and demonstrate manners, I think that's useful. And I think graduating high school, I'm not sure that means what it. We don't have those markers that show that we're actually responsible.
Right.
They might show we're competent, but in what?
Right. Yeah. So like in my perfect world, the stuff that I'm talking about in this book, that would be a required demonstration to transition from adolescence to young adulthood. Right. You would have to demonstrate that you're capable of this kind of self-sufficiency that I'm talking about in the Primal. Now, in order to transition from young adulthood to adulthood, you have to be able to demonstrate the externalization of responsibility, and you have to demonstrate a capability of violence.
Yeah, people will not. Okay, people who follow us and follow your book will understand what you mean by violence. So just for the odd person who drops in out of nowhere, let's just explain that again so that doesn't get jumped off that.
Sure. It just means the application of anything that's not cooperation and not avoidance.
Correct.
Right. So it means you can engage in physical conflict if you need to. You can at least navigate physical conflict. You can at least navigate threats in your environment. You can recognize, the hostile enemy as a hostile enemy.
People think of violence, don't think of violence as a resource that can be to positive or good.
Right.
And they don't think of the threat of violence as being as effective.
Right.
But what you're talking about is being a sheriff, right? I mean,
yes. Yeah. And you can't guard against it if you can't even recognize it. Right. And so
you can't do it. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we're as vulnerable as we are is because we've been told to take violence off the table. So none of us learn it well enough to recognize when it's being applied to us. All this undermining and theft and parasitism, those are violence that's being perpetrated against an in-group, but we can't recognize it because we're told that violence isn't even an option in our culture. Nobody learns it. Nobody develops a capacity for the healthy navigation of violence. So
Yeah,
that's a different book.
We have our own ways of doing it, but in Rome, the youth of the aristocracy were responsible for getting together as a group and acting like policemen, like a militia, walking through the town, ensuring the king's peace in the German terms, but in the Roman peace in the classical sense. That works. I mean, I was in that thing. They called it, I can't remember the name for it, but I was in the thing for, people, police training for kids, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So we got the uniforms and shit, right? Pretend we're cops, right? That was profoundly helpful for me because it radically eliminates your illusions.
Right.
I mean, you go from TV to riding in a cop car.
Right.
And see which in our case we had to spend a few hours in jail, right? Too, running. You guys, it's pretty hard to ride in a cop car and not understand just how fucking insane half the planet is.
Right. Yes.
Anyway, so go ahead. I'm sorry, I keep talking over you.
So I introduced the concepts of maturity with that series, and then the development with that series. Again, that's just to reinforce to the reader that this is where you are now. Somewhere on that scale is where you are now. Right. Somewhere between infancy and adulthood, somewhere between a slave and a sovereign is where you are now.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What if I don't want to be a sovereign, but I'm willing to be a citizen? Like, I don't want political responsibility. I'm willing to defend the commons.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What if I'm a freeman? I'm like, I'm willing to defend I'm willing to be self-sufficient and build a family.
Yeah.
And not being a burden upon others. But I don't know if I'm competent to police the commons.
And that's exactly where we want people to be. We want people to have a strong enough foundation and a strong enough competence and a strong enough agency to be able to make that determination about themselves. You can't do that without those things in place. You can only have it imposed upon you.
So what if I'm like, there's a class of people that are willing to be good, right? They have a trouble competing in the market. They're essentially wannabe serfs, right? In other words, they'll do work assigned, right? But the whole competition in the market thing is too much they feel is too much for them.
Right.
Like, now, is that a problem? In other words, if I'm saying I won't impose a cost on the commons, right? But I am not capable of competing in the commons, is that okay?
If you can truly not impose a cost on the commons, so that if you want to be in that serf position, then you need to find somebody that will take you on as a serf.
Yeah, I'm exploring this. I don't have an opinion.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm just trying to get see how this fits. Because I think it fits. I'm just trying to figure if I'm looking at it right. Which is, let's say I want to. My problem with unions is that they have legal power instead of organizing power. Right. Otherwise, I'm fine with them. Right. As long as I, as the guy who runs this company, and I'm responsible to my shareholders, investors, and whatever, can say, well, you guys going to try to blackmail us. I'm not, I'll just fire you.
Right.
But I'll pay I have to choose the cost of one, because it's going to cost me to fire you. Right. Right. But as long as that's the case, right, I'll negotiate. I love having a union. Right. I mean, that's not a problem. My problem with union is government interference. It's not having a union. And I've seen guys from the union both ways. They're like, yeah, I'm a union guy. Well, it turns out that that particular union I'm thinking about is electrical workers, right? The truth is, those union guys are actually pretty good,
Right.
right? Because they've been through the freaking criteria, whatever. And so I'm actually more trusting of some of those unions than I am the academy, right? By a long shot, right? So what if I view that as serfdom?
And so in the book, one of the criteria I use to define serfdom is that you're involuntarily retained.
Oh, I see.
So I would call that more of an indentured servant than
Sure. Okay, thank you.
right. So you have some
okay, that's good.
where the slave is involuntarily retained, or they have no agency or autonomy. A serf has some agency and autonomy, but they're involuntarily retained.
Whereas, and I was thinking of it more like a peasant.
Right.
And so you're saying that it's more like, okay, I think that we might be missing. I have to adjust my thinking, or anyway, I'll get to think about that. I think under your word, a peasant is a freeman, and that's probably right. Okay.
Yeah. And we can replace a lot of these terms.
I'm just trying to make sure that I don't misspeak if I'm talking about your stuff. Really, I mean,
it's fine. because I want these two concepts to be presented as a parallel. Though I tried to keep them both to 6 points.
Yeah.
Right. And
so I'm there. I got it. I just need to get my head straight on it. Now I get it. Right. And so you're saying if I want to be an indentured servant, that's fine. Yeah. And that's how we would look at a union.
Yes.
You'd sort of think at the military is serfdom, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Now
the military is kind of a gray area because we have a voluntary military in the States. So I would call the military more indentured servitude, but in a place where as soon as they impose a draft, then the military is serfdom.
Yes. That's what I was thinking. Yes. Right. Yeah.
Okay, so with that, we've established the you are here on the map, right? With the context of that first section, and then maturity and development. The whole point of all of that is so I can tell the reader, so this is where you are. This is where you're standing.
All right. So you're trying to give the reader a system of measurement.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, from zero, right? Because they haven't done all the work that we've done, so I have to quickly give them
brilliant.
A system of measurement. So now that I have that in place, then I can start talking to them about, okay, but where should you be?
Yeah. I like it. I like it so much.
Where ought you be right now, given that we're all humans and we're capable of all this stuff. We've survived, for generation after generation. Where ought you be right now, right? And so that's where I get into this idea of the cooperation competence stack, right? It's because without a where to go, the where you are doesn't have a whole lot of meaning, right? So that we have to start building a where to go. And this cooperation competence stack, again, it's how we build ourselves towards being capable of cooperation.
I love how I'm sorry, I'm talking to you.
It's quite all right.
I just love how you're not leaving it at some fucking ideal. No. You will be spiritually fulfilled. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I love how you've taken all that goofy shit away and say, well, you'll be capable of cooperation. You'll be responsible. You've been this stage of development because you're in this stage of maturity. And this is how you want to measure your progress through these things. But the end goal is you're going to have mindfulness and you're going to be able to cooperate with people. And together we'll cooperate. I mean, it's just kind of beautiful that you haven't left it as some virtue will fall out of the sky.
Yeah.
Sorry.
One of my big gripes about the way a lot of this stuff, has been touched on by other people is that some people will tell you the why, some people will tell you the how, but nobody puts it all together into the,
together into something. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then they don't provide the instructions. So that I had to put, all of the pieces in there. So I had to give the why, I had to give the how, and then I had to provide the detailed instruction on each step, right? Because otherwise I'd just be another guy baiting people into hazard, so.
Yeah.
So again, the cooperation competence stack that it starts with the very first one is to become individually dependent, and that means that without assistance you can navigate your environment.
You said individually dependent. I think
individually independent, right?
Yeah.
That means you can draw from it to meet your needs, capable of meeting whatever challenges or threats it presents as an individual, right? And that's the foundation for the entire cooperation or competence stack, right? Is that individual independence.
All right. So let me ask.
Yeah.
Well, there's a limit there, right? You need to know your limit, right? I mean, like one of the sources of mindlessness or anxiety, right, is is knowingly doing something, pursuing a thing that you're not ready for, or may never be competent for. I was like, I might want to pay for the fucking basketball team. I'm 5'7". It's not gonna, and I built like a brick. It's
Right.
not gonna happen.
Yes.
Right? I'm great on the wrestling team. Not a basketball. So,
That's why I became a wrestler.
yeah. So I mean, how do we deal with it's not an unlimited thing. What am I missing here?
This is you're a functional animal.
All right, but that you're not trying to answer that question. You're just trying to answer I'm trying to get you to you're basically functioning animal, right?
Right. Yeah. This is, you can survive your own environment. This is, every other complex animal on the planet can do this. You ought to be able to do this as well.
Okay.
You know, you can pull food from your environment. You can source water from your environment. You can use your environment to protect yourself from the elements, and you can recognize when a threat enters your environment. That's what I mean by
you've taught for years. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Which is what I mean by individually independent, is you're not relying on somebody else for any of those things. You can't, or you're not dependent on somebody else for any of those things. You can rely on others for those things. You can cooperate to achieve those things, but you're not dependent on anyone else for your own existence, for your sustenance, for your.
I can change my oil and replace my radiator. I don't want to.
Right. Exactly.
Right? I mean, that's the difference. Right?
Yeah, and those would be
processes. Somebody, but I'm not. I could do it.
Right. And again, I'm focused entirely on those bottom two layers of the hierarchy of needs, right? That physiological needs and the security and safety needs are the ones that I'm talking about here throughout the whole book. So the next one, the next level up from that is you're socially independent. So you start by building your individual independence, and then you become socially independent, which means you're no longer dependent on the forbearance of others to navigate your social interactions.
Yeah.
Right? You're capable of reciprocity to the degree that you are socially independent.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Where we're not pulling from somebody else to give to the person you're interacting with. Right. You're not a parasite. You're not externalizing the costs of your interactions. Yeah. You're socially independent. You can navigate.
I love this series.
Social.
No, I really love this series. Keep going.
So then after those two are in place, then you become individually valuable. Right. And what that means is that you're capable of asserting ownership over your own incentives. That the values of the value and demands of the world aren't compelling your action, but you are compelling your action through ownership of your own incentives. Which is how I define agency, by the way, for the audience. Once you become individually valuable, then you can become socially valuable, right? So that you've developed some mechanism to provide an exchange of value with others. Right? This is where people have you around because they want you there, because they value you there, not because they need you there in order to provide their food or something like that, right? This is where the exchange of value occurs. It's because you've developed the capacity to be socially valuable. Right. And those are the four big ones in the cooperation competence stack, right? This is where we ought to be as adult humans. We should be individually independent, socially independent, individually valuable, and socially valuable. Each one of us as an adult should be these things in whatever scale we can. We're not going to achieve the same scales, but each one of us should have those four competencies by the time we reach adulthood. Right. And then those four competencies make possible your ability to become dangerously competent, which I introduced in the book a little bit, right? And that's,
for me, that's where mindfulness comes from.
Right. Yeah.
I have to be there or I don't feel good.
Right. Yeah. And that's true, I think, for a lot of us.
I mean, okay.
And that dangerously competent, again, it's one of the catchphrases I use in the business, right? So it's dangerous to what threatens you and competent to what challenges you. And it just goes back to that, what we were talking about earlier, where you can navigate and engage in the healthy forms of violence. You can recognize it, you can interact with it, you can address it, you can respond to it. It doesn't become a reaction for you, it becomes a response, it stays a response for you, right? You're capable of addressing that violent action in whatever way is proportionately appropriate given how it's introduced to you, whether it's undermining, whether it's parasitism, whether it's an actual kinetic threat. You're capable. Once you become dangerously competent, that means that you're capable of responding correctly and accurately, proportionally to that threat. So that's a level above what I call the cooperation competence stack, right? That's like the mastery level.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Now, don't you do a seminar like this or a course like do you
Well, right now my live courses are limited to the situational awareness side of things. Once I have a physical location, I don't have a space to use for it yet. Once I have a physical location, I will be teaching the self-defense stuff and things like that, including all these other things. I'm going to loop it. It's all going to be looped together. But
this year, right?
Yeah.
So I'm reading this, and of course, I read your book, right?
Yeah.
And I read these as the summary because he sends me summaries because he's good at this interview process. So he sends me this stuff to review. And I know material. In other words, I know the underlying subject matter, right? And this feels like I didn't get the depth of it, and I would need a discussion to get the depth of it. So when I say it's a seminar, this seems like I don't know how you can cover it in a seminar for short.
I will. That's one of the things I'm building is the expanded version of all of this stuff so that I can teach it in that exact way. Right? This thing, it's a primer. It has to be a primer. It has to stay a primer. I can't do it all in this one mission. But the goal for me is the live and online classes. That's my ultimate goal here. That's what I want to be offering.
If I was going to teach this, I would be throwing questions out the audience, whatever, and seeing how they respond, and see if I could move the whole group. Because then they would internalize it.
And there's role playing activities you can do to practice these concepts and stuff like that. Put them in awkward situations where they have to demonstrate social independence. How would you navigate social independence in this situation? Things like that. There's a lot of things we can do with this kind of thing. And one of the big things, one of the reasons that I'm so anxious to get the live in-person classes put together is because once you do that, then you can start building community around the education itself. And that's what I want to start facilitating is having a vehicle that builds for lack of a better word, that cult of competence, right? That community of competence around the practice of all of this stuff that I'm covering in this material.
Like, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
When I do my work, right? I'm basically doing falsification, not education.
Yeah.
Right? I'm educating people in the process of falsification, it isn't a positiva.
No.
Right? Which is the problem, right? It's why I'm depressed all the time, is I've got to talk about the negative side of everything.
Right.
And so you've come across and you've written this positiva, the inverse, the positive educational version of it, which I love you for. But what I like is that you've used the same structure, which is you've created a set of measurements. Now you just look at the outline for this. You're saying here's a system of measurement, right? And it's really obvious, and it's also possible. It's also, because you're using only 6 things, right? It's possible to memorize them.
Yes. Yeah.
And am I at this stage yet? And think about it, right? It's like the 7 deadly sins and the virtues. Right. Well, you can memorize them. If you can memorize them, you can test yourself against them, right? But if they're vague concepts, what'll happen, of course, you'll eventually rationalize it. Yep. And so you've created this beautiful thing. I'm just wondering how long it would take me as a student, to memorize, internalize it. And I think it would take some discipline.
Well, the nice thing about teaching this kind of thing, and I did the same thing when I was teaching, the fitness stuff, is you build on concepts, which means you're reiterating concepts every time you cycle through to add another layer to it. So you're getting exposed to it over and over and over again as just part of the cycle of development, right? So
Okay.
each time you take one further step, you quickly recover or retrace all the steps you already took to take that one extra step. And so it really builds very quickly on itself, and it builds competence really quickly on itself. And so that's how I am going to end up teaching all of this stuff, is using that same methodology. So
Sorry for distracting you, but
no, that's good. It's good. It's
um, I don't know if everybody knows you have this business, and you're training people is the thing you do, right?
right. Right.
And you teach the physical, the situational awareness, and this is a natural evolution
Yeah.
of the physical natural awareness, and then this is into your mind.
Right.
So the last point you've got here is dependence and convenience. Can you
Yeah.
say how this summarizes?
Right. So I started the chapter off saying, here's where you are. Right. Then I got into towards the middle or the end of the chapter with the cooperation competence stack. Here's where you ought to be. And then this last part, this dependence and convenience, this is the absurdity of modernity for what passes as adulthood. This is what's in your way. This is what we're going to be overcoming. Yeah. This is the joke that's been being played on you that I want you to become the punchline for, right? I want you to punch back against this punchline, right? So this is where I go back to, the toilet paper stuff. You shouldn't, whether or not the kid at the grocery store puts the toilet paper on the shelf shouldn't upend your world as a adult. Right? I mean, that's right now, people, their anxiety hinges on things like that. And that's an inappropriate application of anxiety. If you're blindfolded in the middle of the street and you can hear cars moving around you, anxiety is an appropriate emotion for that. Not having toilet paper on the shelf, anxiety is not an appropriate emotion for that.
Okay, so there's another angle here that's important.
Yeah.
Your underlying argument is the same one as mine, is y'all fucked up. And the reason is you've lost the capacity for enough control over your environment.
Yeah.
By the illusion that consumption is the same thing.
Right.
Right. That's what's happening, right?
Yes.
The illusion of consumption is the same thing as control. When in fact, consumption is the consumption you have is evidence you're out of control.
Right.
And so what happens though is so many people are so far out of control already that they're holding on by their fingernails.
Yes.
Right. And so the same thing that happened with the vaccine, a concurrence of feeling in control, whether it's toilet paper or virus panic, is actually therapy.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. That's what's happening. Right. That's
well, that's why so many of our institutions are leading with intervention rather than solution. Right. Because they're trying to give that concurrence of feeling of in control. They're trying to present people with
the illusion
of
lie.
Control. Yes, it is absolutely a lie, and it's destroying us.
Yes.
I mean, we can. It is in my take, in my frame, it is one of the most insidious baits into hazard, because it is undermining this foundation that we require to be competent human beings, so that we can cooperate, we can reciprocate, we can move forward and integrate all of the new things that we're being exposed to. It's eroding that foundation, making all of those things inaccessible to us.
I see. So I'm sort of top-down warring against the war against our institutional culture, the production of which this baiting into hazard and false promise and nonsense is actually their weapon of destruction.
Yeah.
I want to cure the institutional problem, but you're just flipping that upside down and saying, let's cure the individual problem.
Yep.
And I think that's beautiful.
Well, it's one of my big goals with this last section here, the dependence and convenience, is I'm trying to demonstrate or articulate or make clear to the reader that right now the world is acting upon them. The world is imposing itself upon them, when the reverse ought to be the case. They should be the one imposing their will upon the world.
Yeah,
in whatever capacity.
I don't know if I know how you mean that. What do you mean there? Because think of how people could misinterpret that. We're all going around with battle axes and make sure that we're right.
Right.
We're right. That's not what you mean.
Right. So right now the world is saying, do this or I will deny you access to the things you need to survive. Right. That's not the world saying, hey, let's engage, let's exchange value, let's be
Right.
useful to each other. That's the world, that's your environment, that's the space around you, whether it's intentional or not, whether it's direct or not. The implication is if you do not comply, you will die. That is the ever-present threat in the dependent world we've created. Right. Whereas the reverse ought to be the case. That
Jump out the window.
Right. That environment is there, and you as the master of environment ought to be leveraging that environment to your benefit. But that requires a minimum set of competencies, right? That you should be looking around as you move through a space as, how is that a resource for me? How is that an opportunity for me? How can I engage productively with this interaction? How can I cooperate to achieve my aims with this interaction? But you can't do that when you're at the mercy of that environment, of that world, of the institutions. Right? When you're in a state of comply or else, you're not in a state of cooperate. Right. So I start the chapter by convincing the reader that they can learn this material. Right. That's the aim at the outset of this specific chapter. By the end of the chapter, I want to convince the reader that they must learn this material.
Yeah. So here's you can do it. Here's how you measure your progress. Or here's a framework for measuring.
Yep.
And here's why. Okay, I got it.
So that's the transition of chapter
thinker. 2. I mean, you're a pretty clear thinker. I mean, has this given you particular influence over your wife or children?
Well, ideally, I don't need to use compulsion with them. I can engage in cooperation more frequently. So, even at home.
Oh, you're like, that was an easy catch for you, man.
Even at home, the goal is to expand the opportunity for cooperation. So, it's fantastic. My kids, they my younger ones at least, that they work with me and with the groups that we engage with and stuff on how to make their own fire and things like that, right? I mean, 4 and 6, and they're learning how to do that stuff, right? I mean, these are people, these are young kids that the world's not going to be a scary place for them like it is for other people. And it's not because they aren't going to be aware of the threats; it's because they know how to navigate them.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, this the beauty of it. It's like that. So we talked about this before, that 100 dangerous things for boys or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Right. It's just, you need to know that stuff.
Yes. And that's the stupid thing is we used to all just know this stuff because we grew up with it. It was around us. It was part of living life, right? And the fact that we didn't notice that it went away, and that's the big problem.
Well, so what's his name? Jonathan Haidt's done some work on this. Actually, one of his students did work on it and came to him, and so they worked on it together.
Right.
Which is that really, this is going to sound awful, but it happens because moms went to work,
right,
developed latchkey kids, felt guilt over it, and so what they became was overprotective. And then the media started with all this crap of like sex predators and whatever, like, and man hate and people fall, bad stuff falling. It was fucking psychosis, right? I mean, it's all real. We're safer now than ever. Not that bad shit doesn't happen, but I mean, if we would get over the fact that you can't fix a sex predator or a career criminal, you can't. I mean, we've got now 70 years of flawless data that says, who said this? Oh, I think Charles Murray said this yesterday or the day before. Is like, the data is when somebody's a fucking problem, you put them away and you keep them there until they're so old they can barely hobble around, and then they're fine. That's it. That's.
I think we should just turn Australia back into a prison colony and just start sending everybody there. But
well, that actually worked out pretty good before. Can we do it like Arizona, or let's pick some less habitable space? I won't say what I was just thinking. That's too awful. Sure, I lost my thread, and it was important to try to get you around to that. Is the beauty? Well, the problem I get from people is that, Kurt, it's not actionable unless we show up in 2 million, right? And you're like, no, it's fucking actionable right here.
Yeah,
A little-
it's been a big source of frustration for me, that mindset
Right.
in our community. It's like you should be doing all this stuff right now.
Yeah. It's just it's easy.
Yeah, I
And,
mean,
and
wherever you're looking around and you're going, the enemy is suppressing my ability to exist. So, okay, get around it then.
or fight it. Just
Right.
put the time in. They don't. This is the problem with conservatives. Which I made a beautiful rant about this in a video. Which is that we're so much leave me alone, let me do. I'm responsible, and I'll get back to my responsibilities.
Right.
Right. I mean that's actually the conservative mindset.
Right.
Right. This problem is interfering with me and my responsibilities, and I don't like that. Whereas the freaking left can't even conceive of that kind of thing, right? So the conservative wants to get. The problem is that this stuff takes time and effort, and the other side, the left, doesn't think that way, right? They think that's their entertainment.
Right.
Undermining is the source of their social activity, and we're like a social. My activity is family, children, production, learning skills, cooperating. They think they're actually creating value. So anyway, so I love that about your work. Noah's done some good work on the family, right? I mean,
Yep.
Is that more of what he's directed in?
Yeah. So from my understanding of his work, I'm not gone through his.
We're just trying to help a promo here, dude.
Yeah. No. The way I structure it in my mind, so I focus on the real core, the basic human competencies, right? That foundational piece, right? Where I leave off is where Noah starts in the actual development of agency of the adult human, right? So I'm the one making the adult human. He's the one that teaches the adult human how to engage productively.
Gotta walk before we can run, son.
Right. I wish it wasn't the case. I wish we didn't have to have this conversation. I wish we didn't lose all these things, but we did. And so now we got to backfill.
All right, so now we plug him. So I was going to try to use that as the step to close the conversation, but I'm still interested in asking you a couple more questions.
Sure.
Is that okay? Because this I don't think about it from your perspective, right? I mean, I always compliment you because I know what you're doing, right? And I'm kind of blown away. And I really respect what Noah is doing, and we have other people. But I mean, we did stupid shit all the fucking time. We got in fights. We rode our bicycles. We had the cops. Cops come over, not because we're doing anything bad, because we just got a little too out of hand.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like we were playing baseball, softball in a street, right? And like the neighbors don't want you to hit their window. I'm like, oh, that's why the cops came, right? Well, that's a good thing for cops to come for, right? I mean, that's not a bad thing for cops to come for. Little old lady's worried about we're gonna put the fucking softball through the plate glass window. If only she knew how incompetent we are. We couldn't hit it. We're lucky we made it across the street, right?
Right.
But so that's a good thing for cops to come for. But mini bikes, motorcycles, bicycles, lighting shit on fire, blowing stuff up, model rockets, fixing cars, that's just normal, in today's version of fixing computers and, doing nonsense like that. Right. So is it just that overprotectiveness that happened because moms just mass went into the workforce? And then this mass hysteria resulted?
Yeah, and it's been a progression. It's been a slow transition. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And when I'm assuming here, I'm assuming that you weren't doing these things last week. So when we did these things, we were a bit younger. We were not adults yet, and we were being afforded some level of forbearance in those actions. Right?
I would actually say we were encouraged.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. We were encouraged to do anything that didn't cause any real problem.
Right. Yeah. You can't get a experience of limits without exploring those limits.
Right.
Right. And nowadays, outside of things like video games, nobody's provided the opportunity to explore limits. And so they believe they don't exist.
So like I got in, I climbed I tell this one all the time. I climbed a telephone pole. I was trying to impress a girl, right?
Right.
So we're out at night, like this is, upstate New York, farm town, right? Little downtown neighborhood, right? And so, we would get the kids out and they'd be like, because this is during the 70s, right? There were a lot of kids. So there'd be like 30, 40, 50, 60 of us, right? And I think I'm going to be cool because I'm going to climb the fucking telephone pole. Well, I get halfway up the telephone pole and there's a cop, right? And he comes down and he just fucking talks to me like
Right.
a real person, like I
Right.
was, right? And I'm like, oh, okay. And then he says, goes in the next day, he shows up my dad's business, and they fucking have a laugh about me getting caught. What does my father do? Come home, you look like a fucking asshole, right? Is the cop
Right.
come over? Right? But it's not, it's not a drama.
No.
It's within the limit.
Right.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
and I just feel like we've made boys into they don't give a shit anymore because unless you're testing a limit, it's not fucking interesting.
Right.
Is there something along those lines? Am I getting
Yeah,
close on there?
the other side of it, and I agree with you completely. And we've had a discussion on this recently as well. As in that scope or in that frame, you are still operating within the norms of your community. So that police officer could have that conversation with your parent, and could just have a conversation with you. He didn't have to throw the book at you. He didn't have to arrest you and take you down the station because you violated something. He could apply judgment because he was capable. He had access to proportionality.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're still
Because
operating within
respect existed.
rules. Right. Yeah. He could
Your respect
anticipate that you
existed.
would respond that way, right? But we don't
You
have
did
access to that a lot
disrespect.
anymore because we don't have those norms anymore. We don't have homogenous behavior expectations anymore, things like that, right? And one of the effects of that is that those behaviors that you were describing about those pushing of limits, they were forbearable when you were younger, when you were an adolescent or a young adult. We're seeing 20, 30, 40-year-olds doing that kind of crap now because they have no regulation. So, I mean, because we've lost that exposure young when you're supposed to be developing your
right.
ideas of it and your responsibility around it, experiencing violating responsibility, so you can see the consequences of violating responsibility, so you know where to draw your lines and know what proportionality. You were supposed to experience those things, learn those things by doing. You don't, and so we're reaching adulthood now without that skill set, without that capacity, without that capability. And so now it becomes all kinds of dysfunctional, and because all kinds of these the behavior that manifests now is it's repulsive. It's sick now. It's like we've got adults behaving like children and expecting for the rest of us adults to just accept it. It's like, no, I'm not gonna call you it.
I can appreciate acting like not like a child. I kind of enjoy acting like my 14-year-old self. Well, maybe my 17-year-old self now and then. I mean, as often as possible, honestly, right? But that's just an expression of joy at the universe.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's not about responsibilities.
I like to say that, as we get older, as we become adults, we should retain our childlike wonder and our childlike experience and capacity for play, but we should let go of our childishness, not our childlikeness.
Oh, you're just saying that's selfishness and irresponsibility.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Play is a good thing. All right. Well, I think I got my last few question out there and I've run over again because I want to keep it to an hour, but I can't. You're too fucking interesting. So thank you for the second chapter.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess we'll do the same thing next week.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So is there anything you want to point people to? Because I know you're going to tell me to put stuff in the links below, but is there anything else you want to point people to while I'm
nope. So corehumancompetence.com is the website for the business. Links to all the materials are through there, and I'll keep expanding them as I keep producing them. The book can be found on any kind of online book seller. I prefer Amazon just because that's the easiest place to get reviews back, and the reviews are really helpful for exposure on the platform. So if you do read the book and you think it might be valuable to others, please come back and leave a review, because it makes a huge difference on how Amazon presents material. The more reviews, the better. I don't even care how good they are, just the more reviews, the better. So if you do read it, come back and let me know how you felt about it. So.
All right, brother. Love you. Thank you very much for the audience. This has been interview with Luke Weinhagen on his most recent book. This is Monday, January 30th. and I hope you have a wonderful time. I certainly enjoyed myself. I hope you did too. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.